Material we covered earlier in this course confirmed a basic relationship. The greater one's income or the greater one's occupational status, the greater will be one's health over time. Those at higher levels of social or economic status will perceive better health than those at levels below them and will have a lesser probability of death. There is, however, a more fundamental relationship underlying this association. The principal determinant both of one's level of income and of one's occupational status is the level of education one has completed. The greater one's level of educational attainment on average, the greater will be both one's income over much of the lifespan and one's occupational status. Both of these outcomes, in turn, are then associated with greater health status. We know that among the three factors shown here, education is perhaps the most important, such that greater educational attainment leads both to better health status and to better socioeconomic status, with these two outcomes highly correlated. Why, though, do different people have different levels of educational attainment? What makes some people persist in their educational efforts while others do less well educationally? Might there be a missing fourth factor that leads both to differing levels of education and to correspondingly different levels of socioeconomic and health status? What might such a missing fourth factor be? Behavioral psychologists have identified an important factor that may act as this missing fourth factor. This factor is often referred to as time perspective. Time perspective is a psychological construct that describes how one weighs past, present, and future influences in making a decision, particularly a decision in which one has to balance the relative rewards with the time it takes to attain those rewards. Am I willing to wait longer and work harder for a greater reward, or would I prefer a lesser reward now with less work or stress involved? Time perspective is thought to represent a subconscious cognitive response that people invoke when making decisions about short-term and long-term actions and goals. A superb example of how time perspective works is provided in an experiment conducted by Walter Mischel, then a psychologist at Stanford University. Stanford works with the Bing Preschool, a high-quality, well-respected preschool that serves as a laboratory for those studying child psychology. The school enrolls a diverse group of preschoolers. Mischel invited 4-year-old children into a room that had a variety of toys, referred to by both the children and the teachers as the game room. Each child was offered the chance to play alone for a while with the toys there, and then to receive a reward for playing so well. The reward was a plate of tasty-looking marshmallows, something nearly every child likes to eat. Mischel explained to the child, if you play with the toys for a while until I come back, you can have 2 marshmallows. But then Mischel offered the child a second option. If you don't want to wait until I come back, ring this bell and I'll come right back. Then you'll get 1 marshmallow. The researchers asked themselves, which children would wait until the teacher came back, about 15 minutes at the most, in order to get 2 marshmallows, and which ones would avoid having to wait so long by ringing the bell and as a result getting 1 marshmallow. But Mischel and colleagues didn't stop there. They were able to follow most of the children until they were adolescents with an average age of about 16 years. They contacted the parents to get information about the child's personal and academic circumstances as a teenager. What they found was striking. As adolescents, the children who were able to wait for the delayed reward were more academically successful, more verbally fluent, more rational, attentive, able to plan ahead, and more able to deal with frustration and stress. Even among the children who chose to push the button, the longer the child waited, the better off he or she was on many of these academic and psychological measures. These results applied equally to boys and to girls. From this study, we can conclude 2 fundamental principles of psychology. First, as 4-year-olds, these children exhibited differing time perspectives. And second, Those children willing to wait longer for a greater reward experience better personal and academic outcomes as adolescents. Psychologists have delved more deeply into the issue of time perspective. Zimbardo and Boyd were able to assess a person's time perspective based on their answers to a series of questions. They were able to characterize different types of time perspective using a series of subscales. They referred to one of these subscales as having a future perspective. Those with this perspective were more likely to respond to questions in the way illustrated on this slide. In contrast to the future perspective, Zimbardo and Boyd described others as having what they referred to as a present fatalistic perspective. These individuals were more likely to ascribe their life experiences to fate rather than to their own actions. Since whatever happened to them was, from their perspective, beyond their control, these individuals tended to avoid planning for the future. A third subscale described those individuals who adopted a present hedonistic perspective, as the researchers described it. These individuals not only avoided planning for the future, but also actively sought out excitement in their daily life, often by being willing to take risks. Let's stop for a minute to think about the 4-year-old children in Michelle's original experiment at Bing Preschool. Might it have been that the children who waited for 2 marshmallows and those who rang the bell for 1 were acting based on differing time perspectives? If a child were to adopt the perspective, before making a decision, I weigh the costs against the benefits, he or she would seem to be viewing their circumstances as, to a large extent, under their own control. Of course, at the age of 4, a child would not necessarily be thinking about things in those explicit terms. Yet, she or he might still view the number of marshmallows they received as largely under their own control. By contrast, the child who thinks, whatever happens is just going to happen no matter what I do, may be more likely to get while the getting is good by ringing the bell. Zimbardo and Boyd studied several hundred college students in California and were able to determine a series of significant correlations between their scales of time perspective and an individual's performance characteristics and personal characteristics. In illustrating these correlations, I use a solid line to represent a direct correlation, with an increase in one factor being associated with an increase in the other. I use a dashed line to represent an inverse correlation, with an increase in one factor being associated with a decrease in the other. Students who demonstrated a future perspective on time had higher grades in college and spent more hours per week studying. They were also less likely to exhibit aggressive tendencies or to lack impulse control. By contrast, those students who demonstrated a present fatalistic perspective showed more aggression and more impulsive behavior, with correspondingly lower grades and less time invested in studying. These results are strikingly similar to the results of the Michelle study when they followed their subjects into high school. Might it be that at the age of 4, children have already adopted their own perspective on time, and that this time perspective stays with them as they enter and subsequently move through school? In 2009, Guthrie and colleagues used the Zimbardo scales of time perspective in a study of more than 500 adults recruited from hair salons and barbershops in a suburb of Washington, D.C. They found that those who exhibited a future perspective tended to be more highly educated and, as a consequence, more likely to be in a professional occupation. By contrast, those with a present fatalistic perspective had the reverse, tending to be less educated and less likely to be in a professional occupation. Time perspective, whether measured as a child, as a college student, or as an adult, seems to be an important predictor of educational and occupational attainment. From the studies we saw earlier in this presentation, we know also that these outcomes are also strongly associated with one's health status as an adult. There may be other psychological factors that are also associated with educational attainment and as a result also with socioeconomic status and with health status. Time preference is a factor some researchers use. In a manner similar to Zimbardo's time perspective, this factor simply assesses the extent to which one would prefer satisfying current needs versus waiting to satisfy future needs. There's also a concept often referred to as self-efficacy. It measures the extent to which an individual perceives himself or herself to have a sense of personal autonomy and control over one's circumstances. There's also a concept referred to as social anomie. Social anomie reflects the extent to which individuals perceive the rules that appear to govern broader society and that offer opportunities for certain social benefits in return for certain behaviors, whether those rules actually apply to them. For example, an individual who experiences social anomie may understand that society promises that those who invest in their own education will be rewarded with a better standard of living as an adult, but that for some reason those rules don't apply to me. Those experiencing social anomie experience life in the broader social system as unfair, favoring some individuals or groups over others. The individual will often perceive that she or he is in the out group, to which the rules of society don't apply equally. Not surprisingly, those who experience social anomie may end up feeling little hope for attaining a better life. Those who experience racial discrimination, especially as a child or young adult, may easily adopt a perspective of social anomie. By coming to perceive that life is inherently unequal and that society has placed limits on the options that are available, one might easily ask the question, why should I even try? Putting these psychological factors together, it becomes easy to see why some individuals, often those from disadvantaged racial or ethnic groups, may simply be unwilling to try to make life better by investing in education. If one thinks, I need to try for all I can get right now, I won't even think about the future. Also, lacking a sense of self-efficacy and perceiving that somehow the broader society will prevent them from getting what they deserve, even if they try, it's understandable that this individual will be hesitant to invest in his or her own education. Failure to invest in one's education will in all likelihood bring with it lower lifetime socioeconomic status as well as worse health status. This process may already be underway by the time a child is getting ready to enter school. Those children born into and growing up in markedly disadvantaged circumstances may already be at a psychological disadvantage when first presented with the opportunity to invest in their education. Should I wait for the 2 marshmallows? Or should I take 1 marshmallow now before it goes away?